Get to the latest in Mexico after one of, if not the leading member of the cartel in Mexico, El Mencho, as we were talking just before the break, taken out on Sunday. Steve Harrigan on the ground. Let's get the latest reporting there.
Busy Costco shoppers walked through a parking lot where cars burned Sunday, hoping the spasms of violence that brought the Mexican state to a standstill are over after the killing of the world's top drug trafficker, El Mencho.
La verdad, tristeza.
The truth is, it's sad because Puerto Vallarta is a very quiet port where you can walk the streets day and night with all the tranquility in the world. And this leaves us a bit restless to do our day-to-day.
The cartels like to target bigger vehicles, buses and trucks. They set them on fire, and they're able to block many lanes at the same time. It causes chaos, but also slows the response of law enforcement. The country's president says all is well as roads, schools, and airports reopen.
Little by little, things are returning to normal.
But local residents aren't so sure. They worry about the impact on tourism, which brings in more than $30 billion a year and accounts for about 8% of the country's GDP. Much of that comes from Americans who cut their trips short after witnessing the violence.
As the helicopter was going by, we could see 3 men sitting on the side with guns and their feet hanging over the edge of the helicopter.
There's also concern about the World Cup. Mexico is scheduled to host 13 World Cup matches this summer, with some games in Guadalajara, which has been in a state of emergency since Sunday.
Tenemos confianza total.
We have total confidence in Mexico, in its president, and we are convinced that everything will turn out in the best possible way.
That's more confidence than even some Mexicans have. When we ask people here, is the violence over? Many responded, it will never be over. In Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, Steve Harrigan, Fox News.
So I was looking at the State Department website a couple hours ago. They did post a new advisory, and I'll read it verbatim. They say, in the last few hours, U.S. officials now saying all restrictions related to the events of Sunday on U.S. government staff in Mexico have been lifted. They also say that U.S. citizens in Mexico should now resume standard levels of precaution. So a sense of normalcy being projected from the State Department and from the U.S. Embassy. Hal Kempfer still here with me. He worked on the war on drugs under U.S. Southern Command. If I have it right, Hal, Mexico is not in Southcom's jurisdiction. But how much do you know about cartel activity in Jalisco? That's where a lot of this was centered. When you were working on the war on drugs, was Jalisco considered a problem area?
Not as much. Actually, when I worked under U.S. Southern Command, but I also worked under a thing that would now be under Northern Command, Southern California, and we worked against what was then a faction of the Sinaloa cartel. And so Culiacan, Sinaloa, that was always big. That was a big area. Of course, everything close to the border, anything along the border, you saw a lot of cartel activity. But as you went further south, there wasn't as much cartel activity. That was changing, though. That was the 90s. In the O's and the teens, things just dramatically spread throughout. And of course, a lot of it had to do with the change coming with the movement of cocaine. You know, cocaine in the 80s, for example, in the early 90s, a lot of it was, you know, kind of Miami Vice stuff. It would go across the water or via planes into Florida. Well, that Florida pipeline was kind of shut down for a large extent, and everything shifted. And when it shifted, you're seeing kind of what you're seeing with the with our strikes on the watercraft that are taking large loads of cocaine out of South America and trying to move it up into Central America and into Mexico, and we're intercepting those boats and those semi-submersibles. That's what happened. And when that happened, it brought the drug trade into central Mexico in a way that it had not been there before. And it really brought the cartels working throughout all of Mexico in a way that they hadn't. And I would also mention with the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, they're big into fentanyl and some of the chemicals that go into methamphetamine. They've got ports on the Atlantic and they got a port on the Pacific. And that's where those chemicals come in. And that's one of the reasons they grew so fast. They made so much money.
So let's kind of talk about El Mencho. He gets taken out. How does a vacuum like that typically get filled within a cartel? I mean, is it a family member that would step up, or are there other avenues that they use to fill the void? As Steve Harrigan reported in his piece there, this is the top drug lord in the world. How does somebody like that get replaced?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't say usually there's a lot of violence involved, no matter who ends up on top. But a lot of times, for example, you've seen in the Sinaloa cartel, his sons have always taken major roles, or there'll be a very close friend, like a partner that he's had from the very beginning. That's very common, and you saw the same thing with the Beltran Leyva cartel and other cartels where there would be key family members. The thing with the drug trade and with all criminal organizations is trust, and it's who they can trust, and usually who they trust, if you will, blood is thicker than water, so to speak, and they trust their family members, and those are the ones they let in, and hence they create these kind of almost like royal succession things where you'll see brothers or sons or uncles or whatever will often step in when one of them is taken out. Now, in this case, he's got a problem because his ex-wife, was just let out of prison. She was in there, and she's obviously not going to take over. And then he doesn't have a whole lot left. He's got a couple brothers in prison. I think his son is in U.S. prison, and then I'm talking about Mencho, and then the other two that would likely take over just don't have enough influence in the cartel. So now they've got 4 major lieutenants that are probably vying for control of the cartel, which is another way of saying you're going to see a lot of violence.
Hal Kempfer is a retired Marine intelligence officer and the host of the Strat podcast. You can listen to Strat anywhere podcasts are available. Man, there's a lot going on in the world lately. What are you going to cover on Strat next?
I may be talking about Mexico.
Yeah. Mexico sounds about right. And of course, you and I keeping a tight eye on Iran as the days tick by as well. Hal, good to see you. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Austin.